Okay. So I'm trying to get this thing exactly where it needs to be. All right. So last week, what we did is we looked at a couple of different aspects of robbery. You guys are getting actually pretty good when it comes to picking out a lot of the different things. And let me see, I'm having a problem finding my information. So hang on just a second here. Okay. All right. So let me go to the actual thing here. Hang on a minute. I'm having some technical difficulties. Okay. All right. Can everybody see this? Okay. So I got a couple head shakes. All right. All right. Looks like I got sound. Okay. So last week's writing assignment, this is actually going to be this week's, but I want to talk about last week's really quick because this week we're going to kind of finish up with some of the basics. This week's is another robbery, but now there's a witness involved. So you have just a little bit more to add in to your writing. But last week, a couple of things came up that I wanted to make sure that we covered. So that way, when we leave this kind of basic robbery report and we move to a domestic violence, next week we're going to do part of a search warrant. So we'll have some different things as we start to get a little bit more difficult, but some things that came up in some of the written assignments. So I wanted to kind of share those with you. So first would be the use of headings. Make sure that you're using the headings. Don't assume that it's okay just to write one paragraph. So continue with the headings. Again, it's easier to read, it's easier to follow, and it's going to break up your report to where it not only formats and looks a little bit better, but it's going to help you add extra content when you look at a heading because something needs to go beneath it. A couple papers that I saw were a little bit thin on the content. And don't forget to fill out all of the boxes that are applicable, at least what you believe to be applicable when it comes to the incident face page, the crime report. A lot of you just put in like the victim's information and left out the suspect. So these are just kind of things to think about as we do our last basic robbery report. Another thing that came out is that a few of you felt like that your victim statements and your investigation kind of ran together, almost like you were repeating yourself a little bit. And a couple of you made some comments to that. So to help you deal with that, keep in mind your victim statement is exactly that. It's what the victim tells you, all of the details, the suspect description, what happened, all of that stuff. Your investigation doesn't have to have all of the victim statement in there. So if you're going to use part of your investigation, if you use it as an intro, I contacted victim Jones, who was near the ATM, then all you really have to do is instead of writing the whole statement, you can say something to the effect of, I contacted victim Jones, who was standing next to the ATM. He was identified by his, driver's license. Jones gave me a brief statement on what occurred. And then you can put, see victim statement. And then you can go into your investigation. So you're not double writing. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Yeah, because a few of you're kind of wondering, do I write the whole statement under the investigation or under the victim thing? And it was kind of like a little bit of extra work. So the investigation would be more like, I checked for video, I looked for the suspect, anything, I checked the crime scene. That's kind of your investigative part. But the statement, the larger portion of the victim statement can stay directly under that victim statement. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So And then a couple other things just to kind of point out, with this type of case, make sure this one you would forward it to detectives because there was no arrest or no identification made. And you want to send it to detectives in case they have similar cases. I saw a couple of papers where it was, forward to the DA. Well, there's no suspect yet in custody, so the DA is not going to want that report yet. So just a little kind of matter of, kind of cleanup. And then finally, make sure in these types of cases that you ask the victim if they can ID. They can identify their suspect. And if they can, that's great. If they can't, it doesn't mean that your report's no good. Detectives might have 2 or 3 more of the exact same robbery, and maybe one of those individuals can ID, and you can still clear up some cases. So don't think that just because someone can't ID, it's not going to go anywhere, but you do want to ask that because it's important if they believe that they can identify the suspect, because they may be the only one out of 4 or 5 robberies. Maybe they're the only victim that got a good look at the suspect. So those are just a couple of things to point out. And so just kind of as we talk about that, carry it over into this week's writing assignment, again, because it's somewhat similar with a little bit more information. You'll have a witness statement, I believe, and that'll pretty much tighten us up for burglaries, robberies, things like that. And then next week, like I said, we're going to learn how to write part of a search warrant. And then we're going to do a domestic violence report, and we're going to kind of ramp it up just a little bit. But definitely stick with the headings. And to give you a couple, just some quick examples. Just a couple of different ways that some of you format your reports, which is fine. So, notification, victim statement, investigation. These are all important things to, and this student put in here description of the possible suspect. That's fine. Always have some type of conclusion in your report and what was taken. So this is really good. And then, Mary, if you don't mind me sharing, you kind of went crazy, but I love it. I love it to death.
Go ahead.
If you ever want to see a robbery report that really kind of thinks outside of the box a little bit, just to show you, and you don't mind, right? Is that okay? Okay, sorry, I didn't want to embarrass you. But make sure, you like to hear you put what was stolen, which is good. You want to make sure that we list the property stolen all the time. Because this is where, remember, where like your records personnel, they're going to take the information off of this and put it in the computers on stolen property, et cetera. So we want to make sure that we're documenting everything on what was taken. Here, same kind of flow: notification, arrival, your victim statement that's in here, a little bit more on the suspect, and then the investigation talking about, looking for surveillance video, et cetera. And then a composite sketch. So, there is a possibility if somebody can ID, you could actually end up doing a sketch. Maybe not you, or you might have a sketched artist. Nowadays, they have actually computerized identikits, which are how you can make a sketch on a computer. In the old days, you used to have to take little pieces of kind of flimsy, really thin plastic that would have like just sets of eyeballs on it. You would overlay them. And it was a very tedious process and would take forever. Now it's computerized, so you can actually build a sketch. And then really interesting here, she has a handgun lineup. And it is important, to the best of your ability, if you can get the victim to maybe identify what type of weapon. We've done this with vehicles before, where we've had them look at pictures of cars to tell us.
I wasn't sure what to name it, so I just went with lineup.
Yeah, that's okay. It could be, it can be handgun lineup, or it could just be, weapon used, or however you want to title it. But, it's good because if someone can actually pick it out, most people don't know the difference in guns. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be. A lot of folks really don't understand the difference. But if they look at a picture, they might be able to say, yeah, it kind of looked like that one. It may not be a perfect thing, but at least you might be able to get some information. And then canvassing in a robbery, you're going to check different locations to see if anybody's there that might have some type of information to add. And then interestingly, you put here media release of the sketch. A lot of times we will put those sketches out. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Here's a sketch. I'm going to guess this is computerized or it was just taken. And if it's not, you're a fabulous artist because all I can do is draw a stick figure. So pretty good. And then this is kind of what we have. And a lot of officers will have like a little sheet. They'll carry it with them in their briefcase or something that have pictures of various firearms. And maybe they can't identify it for sure, but they could say, you know what, it was a little smaller. It kind of looked like that one. So these are all just little things that you could do. And then you could actually do a sketch. Now, you know, the majority of these reports aren't this detailed, but if you have a good series of robberies, etc., and you have the capabilities and the means to document a lot of this stuff, it's really good to do so. Because at the end of the day, you have to kind of think of it this way. People don't typically just wake up and decide, oh, you know what? Today, I think I'm going to go do a robbery. And then they go do one, and that's all they do. Okay, I'm done. I've done my robbery for the year, and I'm not going to do anything else. More than likely, there's something else driving them, so they're going to do more. And a lot of crimes go, you know, unsolved until maybe we catch that individual doing one, and then we can link them up. So the better the report, the better chance we have at clearing a bunch of different cases. So I thought I would just show you those as a couple of quick examples. So this week's, again, is just going to be a little bit different in a sense that we're going to have a witness here to add to your report. So keep in mind kind of what I've said and do your best to kind of make this your final, because it is probably going to be your final robbery type report. You know, we've done some thefts and burglaries and citations and things, but now we're going to step it up. And like I said, next week we're going to do a search warrant, which is going to be kind of cool. So you'll have a chance to look at that. So let's kind of make this our finishing one. So very similar, where you're going to need the crime incident report and you're going to need a narrative. And there's plenty of room on those two things in order to get your report through. So just a couple ideas. All right. So any questions so far? You guys are easy. All right. So now what we want to do is we're going to move into chapter 12, and we're going to talk a little bit about documentation of use of force. And a couple of, you know, this is really an important area because, you know, you're going to be held accountable for whatever level of force you do, whether it's a minor policy or procedure violation, or whether it's something as serious as what you may have saw on TV today. Did everybody see the outcome of the Floyd trial? Yeah, I mean, so this individual, it was extremely held accountable, and you know, it doesn't have anything probably to do with his report. It has to do with his actions. But the better you document, the better off you're going to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about documenting use of force, not necessarily when to use it, but how to write it. And again, because it can be a little bit difficult. So when we look at things that might look kind of simple, and here's a police shooting at De Anza Cove. You can see, you know, it's pretty easy to see that the individual is armed with a handgun, and he's standing in a park area and he's pointing the handgun at people walking by and officers that arrive, etc. You have to start thinking about, how would I write this? Now, detectives will, you know, after this thing is done, if there's a shooting, etc., if there's a fatality, more than likely another agency will investigate it, because you don't typically investigate your own department's shootings. You can work with them, but at Rialto, where I was at, if there was a fatal shooting, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department would come out and they would do the investigation to keep it clean, right? So you're not investigating your own stuff. But, if there's a discharge of a firearm and let's say there's no fatality, more than likely detectives would come out from this agency and they would handle it. But you're still going to have to document something if you're one of the officers on scene that does the initial report. And you have to ask yourself, how would you, just this picture, and we don't have to go into it, but how would you write about what you see and the actions of the individual and, all the different things. And there's different scenarios that we kind of look at. Some are close range, some are further apart. Weapons are different. Here you have, obviously this is a body camera on the officer, which is kind of why you get this look right here. And you can see the person is armed with a pretty good size knife right there. But how are you going to write this up? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Same with here's, this was almost a running gun battle basically, but it was a narcotics deal. And this individual was running at first, he was running forward, but then he turned around and then you can kind of see the handgun right here. So, and again, a lot of these things nowadays are captured on body cameras and you can usually tell because there's a little thing up here on the top. This is from Axon. So it's one of the body camera companies that's out there. So what we want to learn tonight is to understand why use of force forms are required. And some departments have, just like you have a DUI form, some departments might have a separate form. Some agencies have a separate use of force form where you check the boxes and fill in information. Some don't. Some just use the crime incident face page, and then some have an actual form. We'll talk about a couple of different types of use of force, and just to kind of get you thinking about how you would document something like that. We'll look at 3 really critical elements when you write up a use of force report. We'll talk about some legal issues, and then we'll kind of go from there. So the use of force by law enforcement, just to kind of start this off, is probably one area in policing operations that really receives a lot of attention from the public. And it does. I mean, a lot of the videos that you watch probably, and a lot of you do, you watch police videos. And some of them are related to use of force, etc. Some of them are not. But there's a lot of scrutiny, especially nowadays, and a lot of media attention and public attention on use of force. And on top of that, so additionally, it's also pretty close to the #1 source of citizen complaints and litigation, meaning like lawsuits against law enforcement, would be use of force, putting your hands on someone. And that's why, again, it's really important that you have a very thorough documented report. And you have to consider when police use force, they're really tapping into your rights as a citizen under the 4th Amendment, because using force as seen by the courts is actually a seizure. So they, search and seizure. This is a seizure, meaning that you're for whatever reason, you're stopping, detaining, injuring, arresting, detaining an individual. And while that's not a search, it's definitely a seizure. So when we use force, we're going to tap into or infringe on somebody's 4th Amendment rights. So that's another really good reason to have solid documentation. And we know what the 4th Amendment says, and if you don't, you should. But it, kind of in a nutshell, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. And it doesn't say against all searches, it says against unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay, so you have the search and the seizure. Shall not be violated, and no warrants, which we'll talk about next week, shall be issued but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, meaning you have to swear when you get a search warrant signed, you're going to take it into the judge and you're going to swear that your probable cause is true. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. So the Fourth Amendment, again, we're tapping into that a little bit. And the Fourth Amendment originally basically kind of enforced the notion that every man's home is his castle, meaning that the government couldn't just walk into your home and search whatever they wanted to. It also kind of grew from it protected against arbitrary arrests, meaning arrests for kind of no reason, and is the kind of the basis for law regarding things like search warrants, stop and frisk, wiretaps, surveillance. All of these different things kind of fall into the Fourth Amendment. So a lot of different legislations have come out as it relates to the Fourth Amendment. So it's kind of a big deal. So the standard of what they call necessary and reasonable force clause in the Fourth Amendment applies under any seizure or use of force. So what does that kind of mean? It means that you have to show that the force that you used was reasonable and necessary based on the circumstances. And it seems pretty cut and dry, but sometimes it's not. A lot of you have seen some videos where you kind of wonder, was that officer, did he use too much force? Did he have the right to stop them? Yeah, they did, but I mean, you have to kind of think about those things. And there's a lot of different scenarios that are kind of out there. So the basic tenet here is, use the minimum force to control whatever situation you're dealing with. And the use of excessive force, as we know, can result in, disciplinary action at work. It could be civil liability, which means that you could be sued. It could be criminal charges, like we saw today, or you may even lose your job. So that's why it's really important that we understand and know how to document it. And I don't know if this video is going to play, but I'll give you kind of an example. So if it doesn't play, I'm hoping that you can actually get sound in this too, but let's see what it does.
The California Highway Patrol is investigating whether one of its officers used excessive force by repeatedly...
Can you guys hear that? Okay, cool. All right.
...punching a woman during an arrest in Los Angeles. The violent incident was caught on video, as Terry Okita reports.
It was excessive. It was unnecessary.
That's how David Diaz describes what he saw when a California Highway Patrol officer tackled and punched this woman on the side of the freeway. Diaz recorded the encounter on his cell phone camera on Tuesday.
He is breathing her
Oh my gosh, why? The officer is seen following the woman, who was barefoot and seemingly disoriented, onto the freeway shoulder. When she ignored his commands to stop, Diaz says the situation quickly escalated.
He grabs her and she kind of shuns him back, just like a very natural instinct. So once of course he's obviously stronger than her, grabs her, throws her down.
The officer struggled with the woman on the ground and began hitting her in the face repeatedly.
With every punch, it's bouncing her head off the concrete.
And what are you thinking as you're seeing these blows?
It's horrific.
The California Highway Patrol launched a formal investigation after they were made aware of the video. At a press conference Friday, Assistant Chief Chris O'Quinn stressed that the woman's actions put her and other freeway drivers in immediate danger.
I can say that the tape only shows a small part of what transpired. There were events that led up to this. Until all that's collected and put into perspective, we aren't going to be able to make a determination.
That guy's probably stressed out as you know what. That's probably a tough one to do. So, I mean, think about that. The initial call here was the officer going to someone walking on the freeway. And so the officer is there to try to keep the person from walking on the freeway. And they end up, having, kind of this altercation. Now, subsequently, the officer got fired for what he did. But this is probably a good example of, did the officer really have to use that much force? So just a kind of a quick example of that. And there are others that I'm not going to play. You can go through if you want to click on the links later and you can play. But there are situations that do require the use of force, and understand that use of force can be, the situation can be very fluid. It can be very dynamic, and it's always ever changing. So a lot of these things that maybe you kind of look at first, remember, from an officer's perspective, things are moving. It's like a moving target in a sense where people are doing certain things and the dynamics of the situation change. But with that being said, it's important to be able to document your actions accurately by explaining your intention, why you did what you did. And the example, and I won't play the video here, but this Fresno PD video, if you haven't seen it, this individual is basically, they pull him over, suspected as a robbery suspect. And when he gets out of his truck, you can see here his hand is behind his back, and he starts walking back towards the officers, and they're telling him, let me see your hands, let me see your hands, let me see your hands. And then a shooting happens. And the person is not armed. So you can see it's important that the officer be able to document what he saw, what he heard, and how he felt based on that person's actions. Okay, so this is kind of the real important thing for everybody to take away from this. And then there's another one here you can look at, this LAPD video later. But again, ever changing thing. So what are some goals for use of force? So you want to be able to detail what you were feeling at the time that the force was used. And don't be afraid to say that you were afraid. A lot of officers, more so male than female, will stick out their chest and basically said, I wasn't afraid, when really you kind of are. So, if you were afraid that the person was, you're in a wrestling match and they're getting the upper hand, or you were afraid that they had a firearm behind their back, or whatever it is, you have to be able to explain what you were feeling at the time that you used the force. You want to be able to detail why you used the force and how you used the force. And then you're going to also kind of line that up with department policies, indicating whether you followed policy or not. And one of the biggest things to kind of hit on before we move off of this slide is the how. Law enforcement tends to come up with all kinds of little buzzwords or jargon, as we've talked before. So when you document it, instead of saying something like, because I am a 4th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, I, did whatever. You want to be able just to say, based on the suspect's actions, I struck him in the face, or I grabbed him and pulled him to the ground. So you're going to talk in plain English so people can understand what you mean. A lot of times you'll see officers in the report, they'll say, and this isn't too bad, but the suspect took a angry fighting stance. Can anybody tell me what that is? I mean, if you kind of think about it, an angry fighting stance. Okay, so Jamie, that's pretty good. Kind of like, so you want to use plain English to the best that you can and not come up with little like vernacular. Like I remember approving one report when I was a sergeant, and the officer wrote in there, in order to remove the suspect from my partner, I used a distraction blow. I didn't even know what that was. And most people don't know what that is. What he actually did is he slapped the guy to kind of distract him, which it actually kind of worked, but nobody knows what that meant. And remember, you may have to explain yourself in court. So talk in plain English when when you're doing this kind of stuff. Make sure that that you know what you said, everybody else understands what you said, and again, talk in plain English so everyone can really understand kind of where you're coming from, etc. All right, you guys can still hear me okay? Okay, just want to make sure. All right. Okay, and then every department, just so you know, they have, and it's a little bit small, but there's a use of force policy in every organization. And it talks about, what use of force is, and then when you can do it. See here, this department here has what they call a duty to intercede, which means that if you see an officer doing something using force that's clearly beyond what's reasonable, you have a duty to stop them, etc. So there's all these different policies. So you're going to want to know what your policy is, and you'll learn a lot of this in training, etc. So you don't have to panic now, but I wanted you to know that departments do have policies on use of force, and it's talking in here. It talks about reporting the use of force and etc. Okay, and then just like we talked about DUI, driving under the influence or being under the influence, etc. A lot of agencies have a separate and distinct form in addition to your regular report. Some do, some don't. So it depends where you work at. And really the goal with these forms is more protection from potential complaints and civil kind of litigation. It kind of details, you have to go through it and either check the box or write something in, etc. So you're putting more details into that form that helps protect you later on. Instead of just trying to think of everything yourself, a lot of the forms have some pre-printed prompts on there to kind of help you a little bit. So here's an example. They took the title off of it, but it talks about, passive resistance, active resistance, verbal commands, compliance, chemical spray, and we'll talk a little bit about these different types, but these are some pre-printed forms that are used to kind of help stimulate your brain, if you will, to get you thinking about the type of force you used and what you may need to document. Because at the end of the day, the goal of this use of force report is to ensure that you documented all the elements required when you use force on someone. And you definitely want the reader of that report to completely understand what you felt, why the force was used, how you used it, and that you applied it properly. So those are some important things. Again, it's really essential to kind of capture that critical information of the incident, as it'll probably be an extended period before you testify in court. It's not like on TV where you make an arrest today and tomorrow you go to court. Sometimes it could be months, maybe even a year before you actually get to go to trial on a certain case. So you'll be able to kind of refresh your memory and better articulate the facts if your report has all of the information in it that is necessary. So here are the three most critical elements when it comes to a use of force report. The first one is documenting a person's behavior. So why is that? Why is it important that we document someone's behavior?
To help justify your use of force?
That is one reason. And it also shows whoever else is reading the report, the prosecutor, defense attorney, the jury, the person's behavior was at such a level that you had to intercede or do something. So that it's really important that they kind of understand, especially if somebody is kind of really acting out. So it's important to document someone's behavior. And then what kind of follows behind that is to be able to identify and document a need for a response. So why, based on that person's behavior, why did you need to respond and do something? And then finally, you want to be able to document the type of response. So when we go back to that CHP video, woman walking on the freeway, appeared to be homeless, I think. She had, kind of a lot of stuff with her. She's walking on the freeway. Could she have gotten hit by a car and killed or something? It's very possible. Okay, so that's the person's behavior. Not really maybe in control of their faculties. Maybe there's something going on, whatever. She's on the freeway. You don't see a lot of people walking on the freeway. Okay, identify the need for the response. I'm going to go up and I'm going to try to stop her. And if need be, I could grab her by the arm and pull her back or something. And then you want to be able to document the type of response. Well, in this particular case, it didn't go the way that the officer obviously wanted it to go. And he did not do that correctly. But that's kind of how you would kind of map that out. So behavior, the need for the response, and then the type of response to remedy whatever situation. And a lot of agencies describe what force is available in their policies. And a lot of agencies explain the levels of force in what they call a force continuum. Now, some agencies like these and some agencies do not. And some are kind of older and they're really not that great. And some are a little bit newer. But most law enforcement agencies have these policies or these use of force continuums that help guide their use of force. And they describe kind of in an escalating series of actions an officer can take to resolve a certain situation. And these continuums have different levels. And you can move from one level to another in seconds. And I'll ask you what the downside might be in a few minutes, but let me show you one. So here's one from the Riverside Sheriff's Department. And this is one version. So you have, it tells you here, officers shall not use more force than is reasonably necessary. So here's the officer, the perception, cooperative. So you have command presence could be a response, meaning your verbal commands, maybe handcuffing. Then you have what they call passive to active resistance. So you might have pepper spray, and then they have kind of assaultive or high risk, which might turn to a taser, or then you have great bodily injury, which means that you're about to get hurt, and then you may have lethal force. So this one is confusing. Here's a different one by the Sheriff's Department, and this one I like a little bit better because it really kind of talks about what we already went over. It talks about that when you use this thing called the objective reasonable test. So you look at all these subject factors. Does age and size and gender of a suspect play a role in the amount of force you might use? It does, because if the suspect is 6'4", 250, and you are 5'3", 130, that's a big difference. So that factor needs to be noted in your report. So I kind of like this. So they give you these factors. Exhaustion. Are you tired from wrestling or something like that? The severity of the crime, the immediate threat, any weapons, any risk of escape, their mental state, the nature of the crime. All alcohol or drugs. So these are subject factors. And then here's your factors. Maybe your size, your training and experience, your fitness, exhaustion. These are all things to kind of consider. And they even put in things like environmental factors. But they want you to look at all of these to determine, and this is kind of how the court looks at it, was what you did in your situation based on your training and experience, what pretty similar to what somebody else would do. And that's almost how the courts look at it. So this is a pretty decent continuum. So the first one in there, here's a picture of me when I was younger. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I wish. Don't laugh. That could be me someday. Not. All right. So So when you look at the continuum, the bottom ring on the continuum, the very bottom level is your physical presence. So just by being present in uniform is considered part of that use of force continuum, that people will see you as a public, servant, and you have a level of authority, and hopefully they would do what you ask them to do. So an example of physical presence is when an officer basically kind of gestures or raises his hand for somebody to stop, and they stop. All right, enough photos of me. Another example might be calling for more backup officers at a scene to show kind of a show of force for a certain situation. So as we start to kind of move up the ladder, then you have verbal commands. You can exert force by using your voice to give commands to control a situation. And there may be repeated verbal commands. And typically, males are worse than this than females. Males tend to cuss more. Now, there is a time and a place for that. If it's the only way you can get someone's attention and you need to be, loud and you have to interject and there's a little bit of profanity, that's okay sometimes. But you don't want to provoke people. But just understand that just because someone uses profanity for a second, that it's not really necessary. And I'll play you a video either this week or next week that kind of shows that. But so we have officer presence, we have verbal commands. Then kind of next up would be what they call empty hand kind of techniques, where you can just grab onto someone's arm, just to kind of move somebody along. So we're kind of moving up that use of force. Then you have intermediate kind of weapons, and these are things like baton, pepper spray, taser, beanbags, and a canine. And if you don't know what these look like, these are what beanbags look like. If you've never seen them, they're fired from a 12-gauge shotgun. And they're kind of cloth wrapped, and inside there are like little pellets. So this is a sock round, and this is a square beanbag round. And they're less than lethal, and they do leave a really nasty bruise. But this is, it's better than using a firearm if you can use these. So this is a beanbag. Pepper spray. If anybody's ever been pepper sprayed, it's not fun. And different people react to it differently. And officers will carry typically a can of it on their duty belt. Baton, they've evolved over the years. The typical baton that you're going to see now is going to be what they call an asp, and it's retractable. So this part goes down, then this part goes down, and it's all contained within this little handle. So that's what an asp baton looks like. Taser, which is another less lethal device, which has been called many things, from stun guns to kinetic energy devices. There's all kinds of names for them, but taser is typically what they are known by. And you've probably seen videos of those deployed. Canines, typically less lethal and very good at getting people to surrender. A lot of people would rather you get a lot of surrenders with dogs because nobody wants to get bit. It's just kind of a thing. So they're a very valuable tool. And then the top level of force, of course, would be lethal force, which would be handgun, rifle, shotgun, or other. So this is kind of how we stepped up that use of force continuum. So in your report, remember, when we talk about content, be explicit and thorough. Don't cut corners. Take the time, do it right, and document what you need to document. And again, most agencies are going to require that the officer complete the narrative report and the use of force form before they go off shift. So typically that's the way it is. Sometimes they'll let you go and then you'll have to come back. And depending upon what level of force, they may give you a couple of days off, not punitive, but whenever you're involved in a traumatic event, a lot of times you'll be given up to 3 days off to kind of relax and get your head together, etc. One of the reasons for documenting your use of force before you go home is to ensure that, critical documentation while the information is fresh in your head. It sends a message that using any force is serious and should be thoroughly documented and explained, instead of saying, well, come back tomorrow, it's no big deal. Well, it can be a big deal. And then some agencies require, if there is no force used, that you state that in your report. Some do and some don't. Remember to describe your scene. You don't want to be vague or ambiguous, and you don't want to use vague or ambiguous terms that don't belong in a case report, especially for use of force. So you want to be descriptive and never assume that the reader is going to understand what you mean. Like when I used the term distraction blow, I didn't even know what that was. Oh, these guys made it up. And when you assume, if you've never seen this is what happens whenever you assume. When you look at the bottom down there, that's what happens. Don't assume that people know. But you do need to understand that whatever you write in your report, if it's not clear enough, they may have you demonstrate it or talk about it in court. So if you use that thing, distraction blow, the defense attorney, this person's attorney may get you up in front of a jury and say, officer, would you mind demonstrating what a distraction blow is and where that is located in your policy manual? And you can see already that there's going to be an issue, because there isn't one in the policy manual. So be very focused when you write. You want the reader to feel what you felt. So there's nothing wrong with saying that you were afraid, that you feared for your safety, that you feared for your life, etc. Okay? If the suspect uses profanity, use the exact words that the suspect said. Don't be afraid to write that stuff in there. We've talked about that before. If it's really, really important and use of force is, you're going to want to write that in there. Okay? This type of report it's not the time for censorship or being afraid of offending anyone, because this is what somebody said to you. So remember, you need to show the force was used, it was reasonable and necessary given the circumstances. Okay? So you want to be very, very specific in what somebody says. So here's kind of an example. Mr. Jones appeared to be belligerent and was yelling profanities. So I think we've talked about this in a different chapter. What's wrong with this? It's way too general. Okay, we know what belligerent means. Sure, we know what profanities are, but a better way to say it might be exactly what the person said. I'm going to kick your ass. If that's what he said, then that's what you write. The suspect said, quote, I'm going to kick your ass. And then the jury kind of understands, oh, okay. And then the person starts to walk towards you after he says, I'm going to kick your ass. It starts to paint the picture. So it's important that we, again, factual. Okay. We already talked about the 3 important critical things. Again, document the subject's behavior. Simply stating that the person appeared angry, really doesn't tell the reader enough. Describe what you thought made them look angry. Sometimes it's hard, but you want to do that. If they're sweating, if they're, using profanity and you state that out, if they're swinging their arms, whatever they're doing, you want to be able to state that in there. So some examples for that would be using descriptive words like flushed face, pacing back and forth, clenching your fist. Some people do that. They'll clench their fists together really tight. punching a wall. And again, profanity, fighting words, capture those exactly. So you don't want to skimp on that. And then finally, identify the need for the response. As we've said, you're going to have to document why you used the type of force that you did. Was the force you used necessary and appropriate given the circumstances? So just think about that as you kind of talk about these reports. So an example, the officer's intent to strike the upper shoulder blade must be documented in the report accurately, along with an explanation as to why the offender was struck on the head and not the upper shoulder blade. So this happens a lot when an officer means to punch someone or strike someone and the person moves and maybe they're hit in the face or something like that. That does happen. So you have to be able to be specific that your intent was to hit this part, but the person moved and therefore they were hit somewhere else. Don't forget to include medical considerations if they're appropriate. If the subject is injured and you feel medical attention is required, call for it. Don't just sit there and let somebody bleed or what have you. Once everything is settled down and you need medical attention, you call for them and you get them there. Okay. And a lot of agencies have policies that dictate medical response as well. Make sure you get written supplementals. We know what a supplemental report is from every officer at the incident, because that way they can document what they saw the suspect doing. So maybe they didn't use force, but they were there and they heard what the person said. They saw what happened, and they're just going to, you'll attach all of those will go to your report. Okay. And that they'll all come together in that one big use of force report. Keep in mind a couple of important case laws. The law authorizes law enforcement who are trained in use of force to use force in specific circumstances. There's the Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Garner. You don't have to know those, but they're really important that you may want to kind of look them up if you don't. Let's see, we've kind of already covered this. Also in your report, make sure you, again, document any offender injuries. If you have any injuries, anytime we have an officer that gets in a little scuffle with somebody and their uniform's ripped or something, we take pictures of both parties involved very thoroughly, notify a supervisor, and again, your report very thorough. If there's any witnesses, just like in a regular report, if someone was there that saw what happened, you're going to want to get their information and get a statement from them. If there's anybody that, someone has to go to the hospital, you're going to want to get statements at the hospital and you're going to want to take pictures. So it's like any other report, but because it's a use of force report, you just want to be on top of it all and be very, very specific. All right, let me pop out of this. All right, we have more folks here. Oh, look at all these folks here. Hey, everybody. Okay, so real quick, I want to see if these two things will play. And I'm going to play them in order for a reason, because I want you to understand the importance of, looking for evidence at crime scenes, documenting everything, and, as part of your investigation. So some of you may have seen this before, and maybe some of you haven't, but I'm going to play it anyway. Let's see if it works first. Can you guys see that screen?
No.
All right, that's what I thought. Okay, hang on. All right, let me go. All right, so now let's try again. Let's see if I can get to... How about now?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a little grainy. It's going to clear up, but I want you to watch it. This is a car chase of an armed robbery suspect. Okay. What do we think about that? And if you've seen the video before, you don't get to play.
He was getting shot from the back.
Okay.
I didn't see him trying to like get anything out of his pockets or, posing any threat.
Okay. Anybody see any or have any other comments?
The one shot his partner or the other officer.
Okay.
Neither of the officers asked him to stop or anything.
Yeah, it was hard to tell if they were yelling or not, or asking him to, stop or what have you. He did know he was being chased by officers, and he was involved in an armed robbery. But how does that look when they play that on the news? It's going to look ugly because it looks just on what you saw. It looks like, and that's a dash cam, so it's not a body camera, it's a dash cam, which really aren't that great anymore. But if you're me and you watch that, it looks like those two officers shot him in the back a bunch of times. That's really, really what it looks like. Okay. So now, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't have sound for a reason, because now I want you to pay attention. Same car chase. Same thing. Different angle. Now what do you see?
He has a weapon.
Yeah, right here. And what you don't see is the other officer right over here, kind of out of the screen. Now, this isn't a great officer safety kind of thing here, but still, now you see what you didn't see. Okay, and let's watch a little bit more. So he kind of struggles with them. And right now, he turns around, he shoots at that officer, and you see him duck. Yeah, because the bullet went right over his head. And fearing that he's going to go into the store, whether you agree or disagree, they end up using lethal force. Does that change your view on that particular shooting? I mean, it should if... There you go. Great. Okay. I was getting a little background. So if that didn't really change your view, it might a little bit. But that shows you the importance of looking for video at different crime scenes, even in an officer-involved shooting, even in a car chase. If only one of those cars had a dash cam, it would just be the officer's words, maybe, against the, whatever somebody saw, or if the victim, if he survived, etc. It just looks like they shot him in the back for no reason. But yet when you saw the second video, you saw a heck of a lot more. And at least you can articulate a little bit more, perhaps, on why the officers actually used lethal force in that particular case. So hopefully that kind of at least adds a little bit of clarity to the importance of, again, looking for video and, any type of witness statements, etc. Because there are those situations where nobody sees anything. And, unfortunately, if there's no video, no witnesses, no nothing, it just makes it a lot harder when the officers may have been justified in the first place. So, okay. So with that being said, that's going to kind of wrap us up for our lecture. Any questions before we go? So this week, again, this is going to be kind of our last robbery type thing. We've done enough burglaries. We've done enough robberies. Take to heart what I said as far as some of the things that we talked about earlier, and then kind of make this your best robbery report you can, at least, using the headings and filling in as many of the gaps as you can. And then next week, we're going to jump into search warrants, and we're going to write a search warrant. And then we'll have a domestic violence report, and then we'll have another, maybe we'll even get into an actual use of force report. We'll see how the rest of the semester kind of goes. So if that's it, you guys are good to go.
I do have a question, Professor.
Sure.
Like in my report, I wasn't sure what to name the store owners or the store managers to the to whatever little properties were around the robbery. I put just other because they're not witnesses, right?
Yeah, they're not going to be witnesses. I mean, if they saw something, they're a witness. If they're not in a canvas, then they can be other, which is typically what you would just, I contacted, Johnny Jones and he didn't see anything. So others not bad.
Okay, because I wasn't sure. I looked online and I was like, well, that's all I found.
Yeah, because they're not really an involved party because they weren't involved in anything. So yeah, so other would be fine.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right. If that's it, have a great night.
All right, thank you. Good night, sir.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Professor.
All right. We'll see you.
All right, thank you, Professor.
Good night.